Imagine spending 6 weeks negotiating the purchase of a $1.2 million franchise business. You hired an attorney, you paid an accountant to review 3 years of financials, you scheduled inspections and flew out to see the location. You are emotionally committed, financially invested, and 6 weeks deep into a deal that looks exactly like the business you have been trying to buy. Then your lender runs a routine eligibility check and tells you the franchise is not currently listed in the SBA Franchise Directory. The loan you plan to use cannot move forward on a standard timeline. The seller gets impatient. A competing buyer surfaces, and the $15,000 you already spent on due diligence does not come back. That scenario is not rare. It happens because most buyers never check the one database that determines whether their financing path is real before spending the first dollar. There is a 5-item reality check every franchise buyer should run before authorizing any professional to start work on a deal. It is called the SBA Franchise Directory Reality Check. The 5 items are: can the SBA even touch this deal? The structure trap. This month's approval is not next month's. The franchisor matters more than the location. And verify before you spend the first dollar. Welcome to Main Street Ledger. We cover small business acquisitions, SBA lending, franchise ownership, and business finance, all drawn from public sources. If this is your first time here, subscribe below. This is research and education, not financial, legal, or investment advice. Most buyers come into a franchise deal with a reasonable assumption. The franchise is well known. Other buyers have financed it before. SBA loans are common in franchising, so financing must be straightforward. What they do not realize is that the SBA does not evaluate franchises the way a buyer does. A buyer sees a brand with a proven track record. The SBA sees a legal franchise system that either meets its eligibility criteria or does not. The tool the SBA and its lenders use to make that determination is the SBA Franchise Directory, a publicly available list maintained at sba.gov. If the franchise system you are buying is not in that directory, or if its listing has lapsed, the lender cannot process your loan through normal channels. A separate eligibility review is required. That review takes time. Time kills deals. The directory is not widely discussed in most franchise conversations. Brokers focus on the business. Sellers focus on the price. Lenders focus on financials. The directory check often gets treated as a formality handled quietly in underwriting. By the time it surfaces as a problem, the buyer is already deep in the deal. Item 1. Can the SBA even touch this deal? This is the starting question, and it is the one most buyers never ask. Before an SBA lender can process a franchise acquisition loan, the franchise system has to appear in the SBA Franchise Directory. If the brand is listed, the lender can move. If it is not, the lender has to go back to the SBA for a separate eligibility determination. That adds time. In a competitive deal, time is not neutral. Sellers have other options. Exclusivity periods expire. Competing buyers do not wait. The directory check is not something to delegate to the lender and forget about. Buyers who understand how this works check the directory themselves before they are emotionally committed to a business or financially committed to a transaction. It is the first financing gate, not the only one. But nothing downstream moves cleanly until this one clears. Item 2. The structure trap. Here is where buyers make the most common mistake. They recognize the brand, find it in the directory, and assume they are clear. They are not necessarily clear. The directory does not list brands the way a buyer recognizes them. It lists franchise systems by the name that appears in the franchise agreement. That distinction matters more than it sounds. A master franchise arrangement, a sub-franchise structure, or a recently rebranded system may not appear in the directory under the name on the storefront. A buyer might be purchasing a location operating under a well-known consumer brand, but the actual franchise agreement is with a different legal entity or through a structure that maps to something entirely different in the directory. When the lender runs the check, they are not looking at the sign on the building. They are looking at the franchise agreement in front of them. If those two things do not match what is in the directory, the deal has a problem. The fix is simple. Before any professional work begins on a deal, search the directory using the name of the franchise system as it appears in the franchise agreement, not the brand name, not the storefront name, the legal system name in the agreement. That is the name the lender will check. Item 3, this month's approval is not next month's. Directory status is not permanent. A franchise brand can be SBA eligible today and not eligible 3 months from now. That is not a hypothetical. When the SBA reinstated its franchise directory in June 2025, it required all brands that had been listed as of May 2023 to execute a new franchisor certification to maintain their eligibility. As of the date of this video, that certification deadline had been extended to June 30th, 2026. Verify current status at SBA.gov before relying on this in any financing decision. But the broader point is not about one specific deadline. The point is that a directory check from 6 months ago is not a current directory check. A buyer who did preliminary research on a franchise last fall confirmed it was listed and is now deep in a deal has no way of knowing whether that listing is still active. Brands can lose eligibility between the time a buyer starts evaluating a franchise and the time the lender runs the formal check. In a deal where the buyer has already spent weeks and thousands of dollars, discovering that gap late is not a minor inconvenience. It is a potential deal killer. Item 4. The franchisor matters more than the location. This is the single biggest reframe in this video, and it is the one most beginner buyers have never heard. When a buyer evaluates a franchise, they focus on the unit, revenue, cash flow, location, operating history, lease terms. All of that matters. But when the SBA evaluates a franchise, it is not looking at the unit at all. It is looking at the franchisor and the franchise agreement. Specifically, the SBA is evaluating whether the structure of the franchise agreement gives the franchisee enough independence to qualify as a small business under SBA rules. If the franchisor's agreement is structured in a way that gives the franchisor too much control over the franchisee's business, the deal can fail eligibility regardless of how well the unit is performing. Strong revenue does not fix this. Strong cash flow does not fix this. A 10-year operating history does not fix this. The eligibility determination happens at the franchisor level, not the location level. A buyer who falls in love with the numbers before confirming the financing path is building on an assumption that has not been verified. Item 5. Verify before you spend the first dollar. The SBA Franchise Directory is free. It is publicly available at SBA.gov. There is no professional required to access it, no fee to search it, and no reason to wait until a lender brings it up. The steps are straightforward. Search the directory using the franchise system name as it appears in the agreement. Confirm the listing is active. Note when the listing was last updated. If anything looks unclear, ask the franchisor directly before engaging any professionals on the deal. This check is the first financing gate. Clearing it does not mean the financing path is guaranteed. SBA underwriting still has to work. The unit economics still have to support the loan. The lender still has to approve the deal. But none of that process moves cleanly if the directory check fails. For context on what is at stake, legal review, accountant fees, inspections, travel, and lender processing costs on a deal like the one described at the top of this video can easily reach $15,000 before a buyer ever reaches closing. A directory check before authorizing that spending does not remove all risk. It removes the specific risk of spending $15,000 to discover a problem that was visible on SBA.gov before the first invoice arrived. Here are the 5 things worth holding on to from this video. The SBA Franchise Directory is the eligibility screen lenders use before they can process a franchise acquisition loan. If the brand is not listed, the deal does not move on a standard timeline. The directory lists franchise systems by the name in the franchise agreement, not the name on the storefront. Recognizing the brand is not the same as confirming the legal system is listed. Directory status is not permanent. Listings can lapse. Confirm the status is active before advancing any deal, and verify current requirements at SBA.gov. The SBA evaluates the franchisor and the franchise agreement, not the local unit's performance. A great performing store does not solve a franchisor level eligibility problem. The directory check is free, and it is at SBA.gov. It is the first financing gate. Run it before any professional starts billable work on a deal. Before you evaluate the location, evaluate whether the financing path is real. Because the best franchise opportunity on the market is not worth much if the loan you need cannot get to the closing table. If that reframe is useful, subscribe below. There is more where this came from. Research the deal before you fund the deal.